Russia, the largest country on Earth in terms of surface area, emerged from a decade of post-Soviet economic and political turmoil to seek to reassert itself as a world power. But how did this country become so strong in the first place? Peter the Great brought autocracy into Russia and played a major role in bringing his country into the European state system. Russia had now become the largest country in the world, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean. The vast majority of the land was unoccupied and travel was slow. Much of its expansion had taken place in the 17th century, culminating in the first Russian settlement of the Pacific in the mid-17th century, the reconquest of Kiev, and the pacification of the Siberian tribes. However, a population of only 14 million was stretched across this vast landscape. But Russia remains isolated in trade and agriculture. Under Catherine the Great, Russia rapidly expands, with Catherine the Great invading the declining Ottoman Empire. Russia took the Caucasus and soon became recognized as one of Europe's major powers. In 1894, Alexander III was succeeded by his son, Nicholas II, who was committed to retaining the autocracy that his father had left him. Nicholas II proved ineffective as a ruler, and in the end, his dynasty was overthrown by revolution. The Industrial Revolution began to show significant influence in Russia, but the country remained rural and poor. The liberal elements among industrial capitalists and nobility believed in peaceful social reform and a constitutional monarchy, forming the Constitutional Democratic Party, or Cadets. After Bloody Sunday of 1905, Russia became a constitutional monarchy, but disunity between the conservative and socialist elements allowed Nicholas II to reassert his power on Russia. But Nicholas II's disastrous foreign policy in World War I and inability to stop poverty triggered a strike in Petrograd. Nicholas II ordered the army to shoot the workers, but the soldiers were on the side of the workers. Soon, Nicholas II was deposed, and Russia descended into a civil war between the communist Bolsheviks and the royalists. After Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown, in 1917, a bloody civil war spread through the country. A group called the Bolsheviks, embracing Marxism-Leninism, led by Vladimir Lenin, won the civil war in 1922 and declared the Soviet Union. But Lenin's poor health and a dozen assassination attempts led to his death in 1924. And this paved the way for the rivalry between Stalin and Leon Trotsky, the leader of the Red Army. Stalin won the power struggle. The Great Purge, or the Great Terror, was a campaign of political repression in the Soviet Union which occurred from 1936 to 1938. It involved a large-scale purge of the Communist Party and government officials, repression of wealthy peasants, and the Red Army leadership, with widespread police surveillance, suspicion of saboteurs, counter-revolutionaries, imprisonment, and arbitrary executions. Modern historical studies estimate a total number of Stalinism repression deaths in 1937 and 1938 as 950,000 to 1.2 million. In 1941, the dictator of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, decided to rip up the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed just 2 years ago, and invade the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin responded by a quick counter-invasion. After years of bloodshed, the Soviets won. But the catastrophic loss of manpower in the Soviet Union would have terrible effects for the decade to come in this emerging power. In 1953, Joseph Stalin died at the age of 74, and a quick power struggle ensued between Georgy Malenkov, Lavrentiy Beria, and Nikita Khrushchev. After Beria was executed in a coup orchestrated by Khrushchev, Khrushchev took control of the country. After Khrushchev's coup in 1953, he allowed more freedoms of expression and less censorship in the press. But tensions flared up with the other global superpower, the United States, in 1961 after the Bay of Pigs invasion of communist Cuba. The invasion failed, and tensions were so high that nuclear war seemed inevitable. But Khrushchev and U.S. President John F. Kennedy negotiated, and nuclear war was avoided. 2 years later, Khrushchev was overthrown by Second Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Leonid Brezhnev. In 1964, Leonid Brezhnev took power of the Soviet Union and increased military spending. As a result, the Soviet economy stagnated and fell short of the US's economy. In 1982, Leonid Brezhnev died, and two ill and frail communist bureaucrats took power, but they both failed to serve for more than 2 years. A young 54-year-old Mikhail Gorbachev took power and implemented reforms. Gorbachev's democratic reforms of Perestroika and Glasnost were initially successful, but due to the republic's increased autonomy, more and more people were demanding complete independence from the Soviet Union and democracy. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed after Gorbachev resigned as General Secretary of the Communist Party. Boris Yeltsin, a former Communist Party bureaucrat, led the newly independent Russian Federation. In 1991, Boris Yeltsin became the first president of the newly founded Russian Federation. But his terrible economic policies of shock therapy led to the total collapse of the Soviet economy, and his dependence on oligarchs made him deeply unpopular. In 1999, Yeltsin resigned from his disastrous presidency and gave power to the largely unknown Vladimir Putin. He quickly purged the corrupt oligarchs from power and led his country to become a world power once again.